As moderator, I may choose to ask a follow-up question to which each candidate will have 30 seconds to respond. We will alternate the order of which candidate first answers the question posed. At the end of the debate, there will be a closing statement from each candidate. A coin toss before the debate determined that Mr. Burridge will speak first. Professor Dessart has the first question. Professor Dessart?
Thank you. Good evening, gentlemen. I'd like to start tonight by bringing up an issue that has been of some relevance in the race here recently, and that's the question of the minimum wage. Whether it should be raised and whether or not it is relevant for the state of Utah. So I'd like you to sort of elaborate on whether or not we should raise the minimum wage, and is it a relevant issue, not just for Utah, but for the nation?
It's an absolutely relevant issue. It's relevant to over the 16,000 people in Utah that make minimum wage or less, and it's relative to our young men and women that are saving for college and missions. It's relevant to a lot of families in this district. The reason why we have a minimum wage is because history has shown that if we don't have one, employers will pay less than that standard. In the last 10 years, we have not had an increase in the minimum wage. But at the same time, Congress has given themselves a raise of almost $30,000. It's important for us to have a safety net to keep bad actors in the marketplace from abusing workers. The reason why we have a minimum wage is because people will be taken advantage of. We're not talking about all the people that may make more than $5.15 an hour. We're talking about protecting those that don't make more than $5.15 an hour. In fact, in this state, just to get above the poverty line, 2 parents need to make more than $13 an hour. We need to do better on the minimum wage, and I'd vote to increase it.
Thank you. We agree on many of the elements of this. Nobody wants anybody to live at minimum wage. The data that Mr. Burridge refers to, 16,000 people on minimum wage, is actually old. That's when we had over 4% unemployment in Utah. Today we have 2.8% unemployment. The fact is, the best security, the best way to protect people from low wages is to have a booming economy. And fortunately in Utah we have that today, and that's a very healthy thing. As I was going to bed last night, my mind drifted as I thought through the day to Eugene McCarthy, who ran for Congress in 1960, or ran for the presidency in 1968, and then thereafter he went into business. He'd been a congressman and a senator and a presidential candidate and then a businessman, and he failed in his business. He spent years walking around telling people that government regulation destroys business. Now, he never became a Republican, although we'd accept him into the party if he did. But he makes the point that regulation is bad and letting people be innovative and create value is good, and that's the way we're going to solve the problem with people who have low incomes in America.
Follow-up question for both of you on this minimum wage issue. It's received a lot of attention in the press recently because of some remarks you made. First, for Representative Cannon, does the minimum wage actually protect workers from being exploited? And then for Mr. Burridge, we'll ask the question, why don't market forces, in your estimation, prevent that exploitation that you say happens?
The worst exploitation on earth for a worker is to not be able to get a job. And if you have a relevant minimum wage, that means you've got a wage at which people wouldn't hire unless they could create value. In other words, you're keeping people out of the workforce if you've got a wage that is forcing people to pay something above the market. And so, yeah, it has a very negative effect if it's relevant. If it's not relevant, then let's get on with life and let business succeed and bid up the price of labor.
Mr. Burridge?
It's not a question of relevancy. The fact is we need to have situations where workers are protected. Those that hold all the capital often have bigger bargaining power than the workers. That's why we've had labor protection laws in this country, and we need all kinds of regulation when it comes to protecting workers. We don't want to go back 100 years where we had child labor and where we had obscene working conditions. There are many relevant standards to protect workers. We need to protect all the people in our society, single mothers, young people, so that they can make a living in our society.
Yeah, Professor Dessart's question referenced a rather controversial remark that the congressman made with regard to they should either get an education or go down the street and work at McDonald's. Did you consider that remark that he made inaccurate or offensive in any way? And Representative Cannon, why all the furor about that particular remark?
I think that the remark evidenced that the congressman is out of touch with his constituency. I'm a consumer rights lawyer. I meet with people all the time that are having a tough time in the marketplace. And I'm going to side with the people that need help in our society. We have single mothers, we have kids saving for missions and college, and I'm going to side with those people instead of those that want to use their position as the strong capitalists to exploit the workers.
Representative Cannon.
You know, we differ fundamentally here. I don't believe that capitalists exploit workers in a negative sense. They create work for people and they pay value. And the key to being an American and becoming wealthy is to create value. The fact is, the data that are being referred to here are 2 years old. We had some people perhaps in fact, there may be people today who are at minimum wage, but those people either are people who are working for tips, and so the minimum wage is not particularly relevant, or they're in a program that is difficult, that caters to their particular needs, or they're in training. Other than that, we don't have people, and in fact, I think it's pretty clear that there are very few people today in that category. Let's make business work so that people don't suffer the kinds of problems that Mr. Burridge is talking about.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
Thank you. Mr. Burridge has made congressional ethics the centerpiece of his campaign and has attempted to link Mr. Cannon to the Jack Abramoff scandal. Candidates, I'd like to hear your views on ethics.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wright. Ethics are vitally important. The nice thing is that we've been in a country for a couple of hundred years and we've had every ethical problem that's ever going to happen. And we have in place today laws that have actually put many, many people in jail, and more people are actually going to jail because in this wealthy environment, there's been a cross the lines, both parties problem with ethics. And so, yeah, the nice thing is we have laws in place, and it's vital that we enforce those laws and that people who do things that are improper suffer the penalty for that. And we have put a lot of people in jail, and deservedly they're there and should be there. A lot is said about ethics. I think even the Tribune, no particular friend of mine, has pointed out that there's no association, no taint with the Abramoff scandal, and for which I'm grateful. My office operates very carefully in this regard. We don't take trips. We don't do the kinds of things that have led some of these people into problems. But thank heaven for law, and thank heaven for the enforcement of law, and thank heaven for the experience we've accumulated over many years in this area.
Mr. Burridge.
I think the people of the 3rd Congressional District want a candidate that's going to stand up for the highest ethical values instead of pushing the envelope all the time when it comes to ethics. One disagreement that my opponent and I have is that I want to stop the revolving door between the lobbyist firms and our congressional offices. This erodes our constitutional rights. When people come in that are partnered with Jack Abramoff, who've represented gambling firms and nefarious dictators throughout the world, come in and run our congressional offices, it's very difficult for the people to know exactly what's going on. And it takes away accountability. We should have people that are hired from Utah. We've got smart people here in Utah, and we need to stop this corrosion of our government by letting lobbyists come in and run our offices. If I'm elected, I would vote to stop the revolving door between K Street and our congressional offices and impose the highest standards of reform. We don't need somebody that's going to be pushing the envelope, trying to get through the ethics loopholes. We need someone that's going to stand up because that more reflects the values of this community, and I believe I reflect those values better than my opponent.
Is there a culture of corruption in Washington, D.C. under the Republican Party or even both political parties? Mr. Burridge referred to K Street. K Street is where all the lobbyists are. We've had the K Street Project, which was a significant attempt by the political parties to put their individuals in, former staff members, in lobbying firms that could then come back and lobby Congress on behalf of wealthy interests. Is there a culture of corruption in Washington, D.C.? If so, what would you specifically do about it? Representative Cannon, and then Mr. Burridge.
I'd actually be interested in what Mr. Burridge has to say and would like to respond to that. But the fact is, we've had a culture of corruption in America from the beginning. The great thing about America is we've got the balance of powers. We have division of power between branches of government, between the federal government and the states, and we have prosecutors and we have people to help corral that. But corruption goes back to the beginning, all the way to the beginning, and the key thing here is to recognize that power corrupts and then deal with it. I take some offense at the suggestion that I have not kept myself and my staff to the highest levels of carefulness on these issues. You have to be careful because there are people out there that want to spurn congressmen, and you need to be sophisticated as you go about that process.